It is freedom. It is just you and this bike, and you go as far as you can. And it's the closest thing, and others have said it, but it is kind of like one of the closest things you can get to flying. You know, the sense of going far and getting there on your own volition.
I think it's a huge psychological benefit for a lot of people. Certainly for me. Me and a bike, I just get on it and just go somewhere. Like sometimes I'll have real frustrating days in the shop, and I'll go out and I'll just ride for an hour and I'll come back and like I forgot what I was angry about. Yeah, that's what's really good about cycling. It helps you forget your problems.
I wouldn't say I take a moment, but I have a flash of like, well, this is pretty cool. We're all like, half of us are out here on my bikes, you know. Other friends have said, look at all the smiles you put on all of our faces, John. This is like really cool. And it is cool, you know. I don't say that because I'm on camera, but it is kind of cool, yeah.
What I love about John's bikes is he takes inspiration from the kind of classic traditional bike design, and then he applies it with some modern touches. He can make a bike that's just totally classic, you know, fully into that vintage look, or he's willing to make it something unique.
I think that he has focused on a certain style, and he does a really, really great job of it. And I think he does what he wants to do. He is trying to cater to a certain type of people, or he's trying to tell people, hey, you don't have to have a racing bike. You don't have to have some sort of hardcore mountain bike. You don't have to have whatever carbon fiber mass-produced bike. You can get something very personal. He came to me to get a bike frame. It wasn't really long after that. I think it was about the time that he had his new frame in his hands, he started talking about wanting to learn the process. He had asked to be at my shop while the bike was being built. And maybe that made an impression upon him, but maybe he had already made up his mind it was something he wanted to do.
Being able to work with Paul Sadoff at Rock Lobster was just the nail. You know, it's just really, this is what, because up until that point, you know, I just didn't really know what I wanted to pursue as a, you know, quote unquote career.
And so he spent some time in my shop, and I taught him welding and brazing.
So TIG welding is, it's a heat, right? But it's heat generated by electricity. So you're essentially bouncing electrons from the torch to the metal, and it's going so fast, it's creating heat. That's a good process because the heat is concentrated, and afterwards you have a finished product after you do the weld. And so you can make frames faster. Where brazing is, you're not melting the parent material, that being like the tubes, you're melting the filler rod. It's a little bit wider heat affected zone, and you generally have to go back over it, like sanding and filing it to make it look the way you want to. And so depending on how good you are with heat and timing, there is some cleanup that you have to do at the shorelines. The better are you at it, the less cleanup. Generally speaking, TIG welding is a more efficient process, so you can make things faster. And you can make things with all kinds of different angles. You're not constrained by the lugs. And it's a different look. It costs less than lugs because the labor involved. Lugs are generally for people who have a real affection for the old school look and want some like modern amenities to it that they couldn't put on an old lug bike.
John's style is not to just do one type of welding. And if you look at this frame here, he has TIG welded the head tube to the top tube and down tube, but then he's brazed this seat stay here to the seat tube. There's parts on here that hold all the extra things you need, the water bottle bosses and stuff, that's all brazed on versus TIG welded. So you utilize all these different tools in order to make the bicycle frame. It's not just, I'm using a TIG welder every day and so I get really good at TIG welding. He has to be good at all of it, and he has to know how to machine it. He has to cut the angles properly. I mean, this stuff is very complicated where you have a tapered head tube and you have these round tubes joining together. That is a very complicated curve in order to get it to fit together the right way. And it's just when you look at it and you see a flawless connection out of all of that, in a way it disappears because it's perfect. But when you stare at it closely, you really see the detail and the craftsmanship that went into making it.
Welded bikes can be beautiful, and he builds some of the most beautiful welded bikes I've seen. He knows the lines of them, and the curve of the front fork, and some of the tubing. It's all aesthetically really, really nice. Like the frame I'm building right there, back in the vise there, it's got a little bit of curves. It's not quite as artful as what John's doing, but I've kind of gone away from making the straight tube characterless welded bikes and trying to put a little bit of flavor into them, and John has gone probably a step further than I have.
So for the longest time, bikes were constructed in a method that required lugs, and lugs are these cast joints, if you will, so like tubes slip in them, and at that joint is what's the lug that's holding them together. That was the old school way of doing bikes for a really long time. Many would argue, I would probably be part of that group, that like those were really pretty bikes and elegant. And so I take some of that style and I bring it into the TIG welded construction realm.
Every single frame that John has made or is making, there really isn't an exact copy of it out there. They can look similar to the uninitiated, I guess. They could say, oh, that's just a bike frame, or that looks like the old bike frames from the past. There's nothing easily replicatable on a bike like this. In some ways, every little thing is unique in each of the bikes he builds. He can take a standard fork crown and then carve it into his own shapes and his own aesthetic style and then weld it together. And so, I've got several forks here that are all made from a similar fork crown, but the way he's carved them uniquely in each one, they look different.
For a long time, it was cycle touring. People had 4 panniers, 2 in the front, 2 in the back, and would go on long bike rides. pavement, sometimes dirt, and bike touring. And so the modern iteration of that is bike packing. So it's a little more pared down. The bags are generally higher up on the bike. And it's a way to just kind of like, be a little more minimalistic and be in the backcountry.
As cyclists, we try to avoid the busy, narrow roads as much as possible. So it's kind of the challenge is finding a route where you can do 70, 80, 100 miles and be away from traffic and get to see the whole county in one day. West Sonoma County is hands down, it's the best place for cycling.
We are blessed here to have such good riding, and it's accessible. You don't have to drive through a crowded city for a long time to get to these places. You can literally just here jump on a bike path and get out.
We have every type of terrain. We have just an immense amount of a network of old roads that were for ranching or for logging, and they're now there's very few cars, very little traffic.
So you're just riding through town for a few miles and you're in these pristine areas. And then afterwards, when you're thirsty, you stop at wineries. We got hella good beer.
And we've got a lot of little parks now and more open space, more preservation. Companies or groups are buying up a lot of land and preserving it and opening it up to the public. And so we're slowly starting to see we're slowly getting more and more opportunities to ride.
Generally speaking, a frame, like if you just take out all of the customer service part and the designing part and then just like the fabrication part, it takes me about a week to do a frame and fork, maybe a little less. Even though the process is the same, there's all these like micro problem solving moments. And that's what keeps you on your toes. It's not something that I only do, but not a lot of people do. Like the way I have the seat stays crossed over the seat tube and it attached to the top tube in front of the seat tube. The way I address the dropouts when they attach to the fork blades and the stays in the back, it has this really scalloped, lugged look as opposed to a welded look. I can really get into reshaping the fork crown so that they look pretty unique, or just maybe just do a little touch to them to make them look unique. Again, I'm not the only one who does it, but not a lot of people do it. I guess those are visible things that would be like, yeah, that's a Fitz. You go from a conversation, essentially, to some written scratches on a piece of paper, to some pixels on a screen that is the drawing, to a bunch of raw material of tubes, and then you make something that really makes somebody stoked on, happy. To me, that kind of feels like magic. I mean, it doesn't happen all the time, depending on, how you jive with the customer, how they jive with you, how much they want to be a part of the process. And it's always a bit more a richer experience when you're working with a local person, just because you get to meet them. I mean, really, that's what it comes down to. It's not because they're better people. You just get to meet them.
I appreciate that he will kind of challenge sort of the standard thoughts on the bicycle level, but I also appreciate him just as, you know, he's a cool person, and, you know, he's fun to talk to, so, and ride with. He's a good rider himself, so.
I found him to be extremely sincere and focused and courteous. I was impressed with him, really. Yeah, he was a good guy, you know, and I still consider him a friend after all these years.
You hear this so many times about like relationships, right? And like, this is why we're here, to have meaningful relationships with people. This is part of that.